All right, so we'll also talk about publishing and distribution. Now we had questions about sound, and it talked about how Facebook handles certain things, and how YouTube's handle certain things, and Oculus Store handles certain things. We'll talk about that in a little depth. Also, since we don't have a lot of time, if you have questions at any point, just go ahead, let me know. And safety and health. Now we've already talked about that, but let's talk about further down as to how it would impact when you're creating, when you're pre-production, when you're thinking about making an experience. How do you think about and how do you handle these challenges? So, first off is the tools and tech. Now, we talked about cameras, this is one of them. Now, this particular camera has 6 lenses. Now, the idea of what does a camera has to do in VR, it basically has to take apart, it sees space in a sphere. Every time you put a VR camera in a space, it is thinking of it as a sphere. So what you have to understand is the more lenses a camera has, the more data it is available for it, and that helps us to recreate the sphere with much more adequate realism when we are actually putting it at the viewing stage. Right. The second is the ambisonic microphone. So we had a question about how do we sound, right? So this is basically that MBO mic that we talked about. Now this, again, I'll cut it short because you already heard it right away. However, when you're doing sound on a practical stage, when you're capturing for films, a lapel does not work always because it's 360. You can see things. You can't really hide a lapel if the character or your actor turns around. So every scene or every shot is a different challenge. Sometimes lapels work, sometimes a boom will have to be put in. Again, every scene and every time we worked on things, it's always different. It's never the same. There's no standard way of making things. And the third is depth data. Now this is not what we talked about yet. Now this is very crucial to understand the 3D depth, right? Right now that you see me and I see you, there's a sense of depth that you can perceive. When you see this on a flat screen, on a movie, the lenses help you give you that sense of depth. But if it's a wide lens and you see everything, it looks pretty flat. So you need to capture depth separately and bring it back into the system and put it in there. Now, I'll just show you an example as to why depth is important. So this is basically what depth helps you recreate and give that sense of detail. Otherwise, it looks just flat, spherical video. So this is important, and yeah. Let's talk about headsets a little. This is very important to talk about, and I'll go in little depth about this even though we've covered it. It is because when you're recreating or you're creating an experience, it is important to understand what platform you're making it for, right? So we've got phone head-mounted displays like that gentleman had bought. You put in a phone, you see things. Now this is where the mass is, as we already talked about it. And this is where if you're creating something for this, you have to understand what is possible. Now if you're making an experience for YouTube, for example, you cannot be wasting your time in recreating the sound design in 9 channels ambisonics or spatial, because it's just giving you stereo out. So where do you spend your resources needs to be decided before you go on floor. So pre-production is very important, and understanding what possibilities there are to view things on makes a lot of challenges. If you're making something for example, TV, it's not the same amount of effort you're putting in terms of quality as a cinema movie, right? You want it 2K, you want this and that. This is the other kind of head-mounted display. So this basically has everything in it. There's a computational happening in it. You have controllers to engage within it, and this is slightly obviously expensive. Then we have the PS4, right? So there is this kind of headsets are the Oculus Rift S or the Vive or the PS4 VR. Now, these need a good computer to work with. You need higher graphics, you need higher things, and this lets you be very immersive in it because that's the kind of output. But this is very expensive. And this is what most of the people think of when they think of a VR experience. This is the kind of headset that comes to their mind. And then obviously we have location-based or full-form 6DoF VR experiences. Now, if you're making something for this, you need to go way beyond than just capturing 360 and doing, because here you have to program the seat, you have to program it with your movie, a lot of moving parts in this. So what you're focusing on really has an impact onto the kind of money, effort, and time you'll be putting into this. And there are also treadmills. Has anyone seen Ready Player One yet?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So that, if you see that movie, that pretty much tells you what the possibilities are for the next 15 years, where they are thinking of going ahead. Now, at the moment in VR, we have control over sight and sound, but that's not the end of it. The real interest is going to be when you can control smell and touch. When you can feel things. If you are moving around in a virtual environment, you hold a rock and you feel in your hand that, oh, okay, there is mass in it. So there are people working on this. It's called haptics, and that's going to be fun. Then let's talk about this. This is important to understand. So we've talked about 360, we've talked about 3DoF and 6DoF. This is a decent visual representation of what a cinematic video 360 VR is, as opposed to full-scale 6DoF experience. Is this now clear in your heads as to what to expect when you're making these differences? I can move on. Yeah?
Yes.
All right. Ooh. Immersion. Now, again, we had a long talk about immersion, the kind of things that go into it. But really, as a producer, and as a human being in general, actually, when you're thinking about immersion, you've been immersed by words in a book, you've been immersed by colors on a painting, you've been immersed by stars in the sky, right? Anything that takes you away from wherever you are, and you are in your own little world, that's basically immersion. That's how I understand it, and that's how most of the people feel. Now, when you're thinking about an idea, when you're thinking about a story to tell, it's important to understand what will really immerse you, what will really captivate you, and one key thing to understand is empathy. You have to create empathy for the viewer to feel immersed. If you put a war scene, it can be dramatic if it's done right, and it can help people understand why you should not go to war. Or on the other hand, it can have the opposite effect and can make people pretty violent. So you have to tread that line very well. You have to understand that the effects VR can have are deep. They are not just a simple, oh, it was good, oh, it was fun. Which can be, but this is where you have to understand technical and narrative immersion. Also, regarding narrative immersion, Yang will go into depth about it. But I just wanted to make a point that we have to move beyond the traditional filmmaking mentality. We have to, immersion is not just what you've imagined, but what can be. That's really immersion. That's when you're really in it, when you're thinking about the possibilities while you are in there. And let's talk about the production pipeline. Now, this is just based on our 1 year of experience of making things, right? The most amount of time that people like to think where you spend time is the production stage, the shoot stage. But really, that's the least amount of time we prefer to spend on it. For a 5-minute experience, we spend about good 3 months making it. Out of that, most of the time is in pre-production and post-production. The production really is capturing data. It's not really that time consuming if you've done your pre-production right, because everything you're doing in pre-production and production is really to get everything proper in post. That's where the film is made. That's where you have all your tech, all your shoot, all your data coming together and amalgamating into the final experience, right? So training is also pretty important at pre-production stage for your below the line crew. Now you might train each other into, direction, this cinematography, that. But it's really important to train your below the line crew because they have no idea what this is. They go on a shoot and they think, it's that frame, they're shooting there. But really you can see everywhere. On our very first shoot, we had a rain machine and it was very tricky to hide the rain machine because it's a big tank. How do you put that? And then you had to teach everybody that everything is seen. So you can't have your lightmen sneaking at the back and smoking a cigarette. You have to make them understand what's what. So, and a quick note on post-production is also the fact that, like you mentioned, right, everything is heavy with VFX. But let's talk about storyboarding first. This is what really we call an equirectangular image, and this is what we achieve when we stitch all our videos together, all our lenses together. Primarily, this is what your panoramic image looks like when you take on a phone, but drawing this is not easy. Understanding perspective is not easy this way. So what we try to do storyboarding in is a cube map. This is primarily used by gamers to do excuse me, texturing for things in a game, but this helps us really well because you can, this basically is divided in top, bottom, front, left, right, and back. That's how you have all these 6 together. This helps, and storyboarding is very important because we're used to watching films for a good amount of time now, 100 years. So we've pretty much understood the grammar of filmmaking, what to expect when someone says it's a close-up, or what to expect when someone says, let's do a swish pan. But when you're trying to create worlds, which is basically every scene that what we do is a world, everybody on your film needs to understand and visualize before you go on board what is happening at each part of the frame, which is basically everywhere. So this helps get all the crew on the same line and also helps them to start solving problems before their eyes at the shoot stage, right? So this is what we prefer to do. And sound, so we had some issues, right? So spatial sound is basically recreating the sense of space as you feel now. Right now that I'm speaking, these 2 speakers are blasting at you, so that's where you think the sound is coming from. But there are also the AC sound, there's this, there's that, there's someone playing on the phone or something or other. So when you're trying to recreate this, it's important to have all the kind of data you get. And Ambisonics really helps us out there because you get the sound in all areas and then you can choose to decide how do you want to get it out. Do you want to do a stereo binaural mix? Do you want the first order Ambisonics, which is 4 channels? Do you want second order, which is 8 channels, and so on and so forth? So getting all the data and then making it into something which is usable is the key here. So you want to have as much data as possible. Also, this is the hardest thing to crack, sound. There's only, like he said, right, there's only one company which holds the main thing, which is Sennheiser. There is no real competition there. So we are really dependent on them. It's also very complicated to get it right. It's very complicated math, even I can't get into it. Also, sound is the most important thing to detect attention in VR. Without sound taking the headway, it just feels flat. Now, when you go watch a movie in Atmos, you can really feel the plane passing over your head with each speaker. That's the kind of effect we have to get in a headset, on a headphone. So that's where the tricky part comes in. Though it's easy to use the software, it's very difficult to design it right. That's where people earn their bucks, right? To get that feeling right. So that's a note that you should always have in mind. Get a good sound guy. Don't skimp out on that. And yeah, let's talk about post. So we talked about the 6 times of the regular filmmaking data that we generate. We need more hard disks, we need more, things, but where really you're spending all this thing is each camera that you use has 6 lenses. Each lens is being recorded separately. Then you go on the stage of stitching it together. Then you fix all the stitching errors and get the final one. Then you have to do VFX for every shot that you've done. Then if you have CG elements, then you'll do that, or more visual effects scenes. And then all the sound data. So when you add all this together, just for a 4-minute thing, it's a lot of task. So your DIT guy has to be very good. And editing is a big task. Editing is not easy because in a frame you know what the grammar is. You know when you want to cut, when you want to do this to get a desired effect. Now if I were to do a mid-shot to close-up shot cut, it feels okay on a regular film. But if I do the same in VR, it's almost like a jump scare. You don't want that when you have a regular scene with a conversation. We're talking right now, and you cut to a close, you're like, go away. So the grammar for editing is evolving, it's changing, and you have to really understand that what you're editing is not a scene or a shot, it's a world. Every time you cut, you are entering into a different world. And that has to feel seamless. That has to feel natural. So it's a very organic process that way. You have to keep doing it, redoing it. For the Kumbh, we had 9 versions. Because you would show it to somebody, they feel, oh no, this can't be. You show it to somebody else, they have a different effect. So trying to make something which pleases the most amount of people is the goal. Because that's the kind of thing it is. It's a non-fiction piece on Kumbh Mela. So you want majority of people to see, not a niche audience. So you have to go through a lot of amount of editing and re-editing to get it right. And yeah, you can't fix it in post. If you think, kar lenge baad mein, not happening. If you've not thought of it in pre-production, you're not getting it in post. There's no way you can fix anything in post in VR. You have to think it and you have to execute it just as you have planned. That's the key thing here for post. So I'll just show you. So this is basically a dual lens camera. There are multiple types of cameras. You've got dual lenses, you've got a single nodal rig. So that's basically one camera and you keep capturing it separately, but it's not good for motion picture. It's good for taking pictures in 360. Then you have multi-lens cameras, which are Obsidian and so forth. And then you have custom rigs. That you can go all out, depending on your budget. You can have 6 or 12 red cameras capturing in 6K with depth or whatever you want to do. But that's a whole different task. And so this is basically what you have, each individual lens, and then you stitch it together is the equirectangular image that you get. You have to do that with 6 of them for everything that you've shot, even though you have not seen it yet. Also, there is no live preview, so you have to do retakes just to make sure you have enough of backup in case your performance is not good. Now this is ceiling replacement. If you're shooting in a studio, this is basically every shot. There is no way to hide lights, so you light it from the top, and you give enough justification for the lighting, but you still have to get the ceiling right. If you're in the open, there are different kinds of challenges where you might want to light it, but then you have to hide it in a way or try to use natural lighting, make it in frame. And this is the tripod cleanup. Again, every shot. Doesn't matter where, but you have to get this right, you have to remove it, and you have to plan it properly. You can't place it at a where, if you go to a beach, you can't just place the camera anywhere. You need to know what the ground is, so you get the plate right. Otherwise, you'll have, water is difficult to just clean up because it's a moving thing. So you want to place it properly, you don't want to just place it at random. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to remove it properly. This is basic green screen, right? Now, all of this is the same shot. It's just cut out in cube map for us to do it easily. We cut out in 6 frames, 6 parts, and then we can do each part individually. then we bring it back together, we stitch it again, and then we have the video. So, yeah. This, I can't stress enough on this. It's very tricky to get it right. Now, obviously, you have the same people in terms of director, producer, writer, and all that. That the headings don't really change. What changes is the kind of job role they have. So a cinemat is not really concerned with, say, movement, because you see everything anyway. You know, there's not much that you can do because really the movement is controlled by the viewer. He or she will decide when to see, what side to see. So your cinemat really has to understand lighting so well that it feels natural wherever you are in that space. Should feel authentic. It should not feel forced as it is lit. So that is a job role which evolves in a very different way. Also, your